Hello, welcome to the Sunday Gardener, and we're going to look at what to do in the garden in June. Here we are in the greenhouse, and as you can see it is absolutely full of different types of plants. Tomato plants, pelargoniums, bedding plants, lettuces, zinnias grown from seed, cucumber, lots and lots of plants. And the thing about June is it's time to plant everything out. It's planting time because the risk of frost has now passed, so it means that tender plants, which are the bedding plants, and some of the tender veg like squashes and tomatoes, can be planted outside if you're growing outside. So amongst other things, we're going to be looking at how to get the best from your bedding plants and looking after bedding plants, tomato care, because lots of people are growing tomatoes this year, looking at potting on and side shoots. We're going to take a look at deadheading, which is really important to prolong flowering in your garden over the summer season. And we're going to look at the vegetable plot and how to plant out different types of veg into the vegetable plot, and lots of other things as well. Well, let's start with bedding plants because they're always really popular, and everyone will be planting out their bedding plants now into hanging baskets and borders. You want to get the best from your bedding plants, and they do tend to get a bit leggy, particularly later on in the season. So one of the things you can do at this early point when they're still quite small is to pinch them out. Whenever you pinch out a plant, it makes it bush. So here is a little petunia. I don't really want it to flower yet. It's got some little flower buds on it because it's in the greenhouse and I'm not ready for planting out quite yet. So I'm going to pinch out those growing points at the very top, and that will make the plant become more bushy. The same thing here with this verbena. I'm going to take out and nip out the top points, and in fact if you look closely there you can see it's been cut, and that's an old cut. That's a cut that's been done in the garden centre by the grower for exactly that reason, to make it a more bushier plant. So with your bedding plants you can pinch out the tops of them. Here's a tray of petunias, and pinch out the tops and they will become more bushy, and you'll try and avoid, they always go leggy at the end of the season, but you can delay it by pinching out the growing points and making the plant bushier. The other thing about bedding plants is, of course, slugs. Slugs love bedding plants as much as we do, so you need to think about it when you're putting out your bedding plants. Fortunately, it's been very, very dry, and that's helped to keep the slug population at bay, but they will be slithering out sooner or later. So put down some form of slug deterrent, and remember that if you have a really badly eaten plant, you can dig it up, bring it into like a greenhouse or an area away from the slugs. It may well recover and you can plant it back out again. One of the most important things if you're planting out bedding plants in a hanging basket is to think about watering, because they do dry out more easily. If you can water them regularly, then that's all well and good, but if you find watering regularly difficult, then you might want to think about something like water retaining gel to help retain some water in the basket and stop it drying out. But the other thing that's quite important, both in relation to bedding plants and plants generally, is in June we start to need to deadhead plants. And it's a bit of a chore, but I suppose it's a bit of a zen chore really. You can just walk around the garden deadheading, relax a bit. And the reason we deadhead is that what a plant wants to do is produce flowers and seeds. And when it's done that, it's fulfilled its task and it will stop flowering. So in order to keep it flowering, we take off the spent flowers, stop the seed forming, and it produces more and more flowers. And that's true of a lot of plants and bedding plants in the garden. So I've got here viola, and I've kept this so that we could have a look at it, and you can see here there's several flowers that have gone over. So what we need to do is snip them off and take them all off. Just have a quick look. There's another one there that's nearly done. There's one there that's done. And that will keep the plant flowering, and that we do that for lots of the plants that we get in the garden. And I'll cut in a couple of images of poppies where sometimes it's quite difficult to tell what's the seed head and what's the flower head. So you do need to look quite carefully, and we'll also take a look at Deadheading Rhododendrons, because they can look quite messy and brown, unsightly blooms fading on the shrubs. And if you want, if that's how you like your garden, you can deadhead them, and we'll have a look at how to do that because they require particular attention. But most of the perennials coming up in the gardens, the geraniums and all the multi-stemmed flowers can be deadheaded, and they will prolong flowering. And that's particularly true of sweet peas. The more you deadhead and pick sweet peas, the more blooms you will get. Deadheading is a job for all of the summer, and it will keep the plants flowering for longer. So it's a really important tip to keep your garden looking really pretty throughout the summer. Lots of people are growing tomatoes this year, and some for the first time, because we've had more time on our hands and everyone has been looking at growing veg at home. So I'm going to look at potting on tomatoes and some other tomato care and tips. And here we have a tomato plant. Now I've deliberately left this one in the pot longer than would be usual in order to show how you need to see that this tomato plant needs repotting. It's much too big for its pot compared to this one, which is a reasonable size and proportion in relation to the pot, and can probably remain in that pot for another couple of weeks or so, but will need repotting. What you need to think about when repotting tomatoes is the size of the pot, because it is quite important. And I'm going to repot into this one. This is a few sizes up, but it's not anything like as large as the eventual pot for the tomato. You can't put a smallish plant into a big pot because it will not thrive. So with tomatoes you have to pot up in stages. It's a bit of a bind, but it's necessary to keep them thriving and growing into really good healthy plants. So the other thing that get asked a lot about on tomatoes, and another reason why I've kept this plant out, is side shoots. And people get confused about taking off side shoots, what's side shoots and what's a branch. Now this tomato plant didn't arrive with me in a great condition. It's one that I bought rather than grew from seed. So it's got rather stumpy branches there because they were bashed and dead and I had to cut them off. It will come good, but it did arrive in a bit of a battered state. But what you can see here, 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 here are the side shoots. Why remove them? Well, tomatoes are a really vigorous plant, and these side shoots will grow yet more branches, and what you will end up with is a plant that is all branch and all leaves and not enough flowers and fruit. So this is what's called a Cordon Tomato, which is straight up, and what it should look like is a single trunk with single branches coming off it, not branches coming off at these right angles as well. So what you need to do, and you need to do it with all tomatoes of this type, but not the bush tomatoes like that you put into hanging baskets. They don't need this treatment, but all upright tomatoes, you need to remove these side shoots and stop them growing. Otherwise you will have just a mass of tomato branches and leaves. And what we want the plant to do is produce flowers and fruit. So what we're going to do is repot it gently, protecting the stem. Take it out of the pot, loosen the roots and sink it into the new pot. With tomatoes, the one thing you need to remember, if you're growing a grafted plant, if you've paid for a grafted plant, which is more expensive, is you must keep the graft above soil level. So when you repot it, you must ensure that the graft is up above the soil, and you will be able to see it when you look at the plant. This is not a grafted plant, so this and any others that aren't grafted, you can pretty well just plonk them in the pot. And this is some compost that I've got to fill it up. Now when you fill the pot up with compost, it looks like it's quite full, but actually if you just tamp it down a bit, you'll see that it drops down quite a lot around the edges, so it's not actually completely full. And what you're doing there is clearing out the air pockets, because you do not want air pockets in the plant. If the roots growing underneath here hit an air pocket, there's no food or nutrient or water from there, and the roots will wither and the plant will not thrive. So you don't want to compact it tightly, but you want to make sure that you don't have any air pockets. And I'm going to use just a thin stick at this stage to support it, because it's going to go from this pot into a much larger pot, and at that point I'm going to put maybe 1 or 2 quite heavy canes in to support the plant and the weight of hopefully the fruit and tomatoes at a later stage. I can use this tie again because it just needs a loose bit of support at this stage. It's a very small plant, but later on it will need a lot of support and quite a lot of soft ties keeping the plant tied into the canes and supporting it. So it's happily repotted there. That will be fine. The most important thing when you repot is to water. This watering can may look surprisingly small, and that's because I've been using it in the greenhouse and I'm still using it for watering quite small seedlings and small plants. But before much longer, obviously I'll get a bigger watering can out, because tomatoes, as they grow, and also cucumbers, need a lot of watering and food and feeding, and one of the most important things of getting good tomatoes is watering and feeding. So don't let your tomatoes dry out. They may need watering every day when it's very dry, particularly in a greenhouse, and they need feeding regularly, once or twice a week. As soon as the flowers start to appear and you get the little yellow trusses of flowers appearing, start to feed them. And the watering and feeding is really important, and that it's done regularly, because one of the main causes for the skin splitting on tomatoes or impaired flavour is that they've had a poor watering and feeding regime, and it's gone from being very dry to getting lots of water and food. What you want to do is to keep it regular, and you should end up with really nice tomatoes at the end of the season. This is a little chili plant. This will be the next one to be potted on. You can see that that's also quite large in proportion to its pot. Once I've potted the chili plant on, that can go out in the garden where it's now quite warm and we are frost free. And also, before we leave the greenhouse, the strawberry hanging basket is doing really well now. It's absolutely covered in fruit. There's no discernible difference in pollination between one side, which I hand pollinated, and the other side, which I've let the pollinators coming into the greenhouse pollinate. The only thing I've taken great care with is to water it virtually daily, so that it's not dried out, it's had plenty of water. It's quite a convenient way to grow strawberries, because they're going to be easy to pick and I don't have to net it. The downside is very regular watering, but it's certainly proved to be an easy way of growing strawberries, particularly if you don't have a lot of space. What we're going to do now is take a look outside in the vegetable plot and a look at a few other things that we can be doing in the garden in June. So here we're outside in the vegetable plot, and one of the things we're going to look at first of all is different types of support for different types of beans. Very popular to grow runner beans, broad beans, French beans and peas, but they're all quite different, and we're just going to have a quick look at the different ways that you need to plant them and support them. So starting with runner beans grow really tall, so you can see I've got some very tall sticks up here, and they will grow right up to the very top. So when you're planting runner beans, make sure that you have something tall for them to grow up. You might not want to use these are just off cuttings. If you like things tidy, use bean poles and make a neat little wigwam. But whatever you use, make sure it's tall for both runner beans and climbing beans. So runner beans are self-clinging, so they will climb and wind around bean poles, as will the French beans. Peas scramble up a net, and broad beans don't climb, don't twine at all, and they need to be supported in a corridor to keep them from flopping over, which is their tendency. So peas like a net to scramble up. So you see here I've planted some peas at the bottom, some twigs to kind of steer them up, and because I've got a second crop coming up behind them, and they will scramble up this net, which is ideal for peas. Broad beans are different again. Broad beans will not climb, will not twine, but they will flop over. So by growing them inside a corridor like this, you're keeping them, once they get to here, they won't flop over, they'll be contained. Even though it looks quite lightweight, it's quite sufficient to support broad beans. So each has a different requirement, which you just need to bear in mind when you're planting them, so you make sure you get the right sort of supports in place for the right sorts of beans. We're just going to take a little look at strawberries next. So here we are at the vegetable plot, and this is the part where I'm growing strawberries, and what I wanted to show was netting strawberries, which is really important because as much as we love strawberries, the birds love them as well, and as soon as they start to ripen, the birds will be there. So I've made a simple structure, and this is cornice, cuttings of cornice that was cut back earlier on in the year. Cornice is really good for making different types of plant supports because it's very pliable, you can bend it, tie it round, and I've covered it with a net, and that should be sufficient to keep the birds off. There are a lot of flowers, which means we're going to get a lot of lovely strawberries, but there was also quite a lot of leaves, and they will cut out lines. The one disease that strawberries can be prone to is botrytis, and that is made worse by a lack of airflow. And so by removing some of the leaves, you're aiding the airflow. And don't worry about how many you cut off. I've saved what I cut off this afternoon to give you an idea of the sort of number of leaves you can cut off. So take a good handful off, and I will cut them off more than once over the summer to make sure there's plenty of air and light getting to the plants, but perhaps don't do what I did and cut off some of the flowers as well. Hello, we're continuing to look at things you can do in your garden in June, and this is one of the times for earthing up potatoes. Got some potatoes here in this area where I'm growing them in containers because I don't have a lot of room in the vegetable plot, and potatoes are an ideal crop for growing in containers. The idea of earthing them up is to fill up the tub with some more compost, to raise the compost level or the soil level. The advantage of earthing up potatoes and raising the soil level is it helps protect the tubers below, because it's very important that they don't go green, as you know, green potatoes can cause a lot of stomach upset, so adding compost helps to keep them dark. It also gives some protection to those tubers also in the event of blight. But earthing them up is simply using soil, compost, spent compost. Now I've got a mixture of spent and new compost here. It needs quite a lot to earth up all the potatoes, so it can be expensive if you use all compost, and sometimes this year in particular it's quite hard to get hold of compost. So I've kept some spent compost and I'm going to use that for earthing up. And all you do, and you need to be really gentle doing this, is that you fill the pot with some more compost. And then just pat it down very gently. You want to be careful because what you don't want to do is damage the top growth, because obviously that will cause problems for the potatoes. Just top up the level of compost. So effectively you're adding extra depth, and that extra depth will give more room for tubers to form, and it will also help to protect the tubers that are in there. And you need to go around the whole of the container, earthing up, adding more soil and compost. And you can do that once or twice during the growing season. Good opportunity to look at blight, which can be a real problem with potatoes. Late blight affects potatoes and tomatoes, and it commonly starts around mid to late June. And the trigger for blight is warm, humid air. Blight travels on the wind, in the air, and it will attack potatoes and tomatoes, and what it does is it turns the foliage brown and the whole top of the plant or the tomato plant starts to collapse. There's no cure for blight, unfortunately, so you can join a website like Blight Watch and you can get an alert for your postcode telling you when there's blight in the area. Like this weekend, it's talking about temperatures of about 20 degrees and rain, and that's classic blight conditions. But even if you know that blight's around, there's nothing you can do about it. There isn't anything you can spray your potatoes. These are early potatoes, and we've had a really good long dry spell. So as you can see, they're a good height, and that will not long before they'll start flowering and be ready for harvest. So one of the things you can do if you have an area where you're prone to blight is to grow early potatoes, to try and get your crop harvested before the blight takes effect. You can also grow types of potatoes which are said to be blight resistant. This area is quite prone to blight because we get quite a lot of wet weather. So I always grow tomatoes in a greenhouse, and if you grow tomatoes in a greenhouse, you will be blight free in respect of tomatoes. Potatoes as an outside crop is more of a risk. So if blight does strike, you will have to remove the leaves that are affected, and eventually you'll have to remove all the leaves from the plant. Now, it does mean at that stage the potatoes will stop growing, but they'll be okay. They'll have formed, and what you can do is leave them in the soil for about 2 weeks so the skins harden, and then you can harvest them, and you'll still get a good crop providing the blight doesn't strike too early. And if you've got potatoes that are looking like this, which is quite a lot of top growth, then you should be fine even if you have to remove all of the foliage at a later stage.